Chanters, I'm Daniel Tucker. Welcome to Kirtan Central. So in this video, I want to share with you my top 10 considerations when you're picking out a harmonium. So in the next video on this page, I'll be going into the harmoniums that we carry here at Kirtan Central. But in this video, no matter what store you're looking at, no matter what brand of harmonium you're looking at, these are just kind of 10 tips to keep in mind as far as the different aspects of the harmonium that you might be dialing in to get just the right one for your chanting needs. So, number one is portability. So there's basically two major types of harmonium. There's portable harmoniums, also called collapsible or fold up or suitcase style harmoniums. They're called suitcase style because, like this one, they have two boxes, a larger outer box and a smaller inner box, and they can collapse together and they kind of fold up and they have a handle so that you can carry them like a little wooden suitcase. So there's that kind, and then there's upright harmoniums, also called stand-up harmoniums, or non-collapsible. And most people these days, in our modern lifestyle, we're so mobile and traveling all over the place, even just down to the yoga studio and back, or whatever it is. Often we do want to move our harmonium around. And so most people have portable or collapsible harmoniums. Sometimes you'll see a stand-up harmonium, like maybe at an ashram, or even in a living room where it's not going to be moved around all that much. Because they're kind of inconvenient to pick up, they're inconvenient to put in your car, you certainly can't put them overhead on an airplane. So by and large, I recommend getting a collapsible kind. So that's number one. Number two is the range of the keyboard. So for this keyboard, and it's essentially a miniaturized piano-style keyboard. These were originally produced in Europe before they caught on in India. So this miniature piano keyboard that drives the harmonium can have different ranges. This one happens to have 2.5 octaves of range. There's even smaller ones that have like 2 octaves of range. Probably the more common is around 3 octaves. Sometimes you'll see 3 1/4, 3.5 octaves. There are even larger ones with 4 octaves or more of range. There's even big old style ones that have foot pedals where you would sit at a bench at the harmonium, play with 2 hands and have foot pedals for the bellows that have a very large range. For kirtan, it's kind of a folk music. We're supporting our singing, so we're only going to be using the part of the harmonium's range that's matching our vocal range. And so for most of our needs for singing kirtan songs, we're going to be using really just the middle portion of the harmonium's keyboard, probably less even than a 2 octave range. So with one of these that has 2.5 octaves, I'll find very rarely will I use the lowest notes. Only occasionally do I get down there. The highest notes, almost never, unless I'm just kind of playing around for fun. Whereas over here I've got one of the 3.5 octave ones. That's kind of a more common size to see. And the larger size keyboard also brings with it a larger size box. So it gets a little bit more resonation, a little bit more volume, a little fuller tone, but very similar tone. So really what you get on those, because they start at the same bass note. So with a 3.5 octave harmonium, or 3 1/4 octave sometimes you see, you're just getting more high notes. And most of us are never going to play those high notes. So it's unnecessary. It's up to you. It kind of gives you room to explore if you want to be, doing scales all the way up and down, or playing your melody or chords an octave up from where you're singing as an alternate to kind of create a different musical style for a section of a song or something. It gives you options, but 2.5 octaves is really plenty for a kirtan. So either works. Number 3 is sets of reeds. So this is really more important than the range. Whatever range you have, keyboard range you have on the harmonium is going to do you just fine. But the sets of reeds is really important. So for each one of these notes that I'm playing, for each one of these keys, inside there are some metal, usually brass reeds that are having the air blown through them. So every note has its own brass reed. Tuned exactly to that pitch. And actually in this harmonium, every note has 2 reeds. The ear doesn't really hear it as 2 reeds. You think, oh, that's one note. Actually, those are 2 reeds, a higher reed and an octave lower reed that are blending together, being played at the same time, and blending together to create a sort of richness of tone. So this would be called a dual reed harmonium, or a harmonium with two sets of reeds. You can get a single reed harmonium that just has one set of reeds. Some of the very small harmoniums or very cheap harmoniums might just have a single set of reeds. It's really funny sounding. If I close off one of these air stops, I can actually isolate one set of reeds and play that for you. Okay, so that's the high reeds. Sounds a little like a duck. Here's the low reeds. Has a little more richness, but it can also be kind of wheezy because the low reeds take longer to actuate, take longer to get the reed vibrating. So really you do want two reeds together. Now there are larger harmoniums that have 3 sets of reeds, some even have 4 sets of reeds. So you get a much fuller, like an organ-like sound, which is kind of cool. So that's a nice sound option, but that adds to the bulk and the weight of the harmonium. So most people avoid those. Sometimes those larger models are used for classical Indian music. Often in kirtan, we're using a dual reed harmonium. Okay, and my number 4 is don't get blinded by bling. So there's a lot of harmonium makers that will pour on all sorts of features, and often they have shiny metal components, so I call it bling. And you don't need any of them. Most real musicians will not be using these features. But unfortunately a store or a harmonium maker might be able to convince a beginner that you really need this feature and that feature and that you don't. So don't get blinded by features. This includes buttons, also called knobs or stops. At the front of the harmonium there's these metal buttons. Some of them are air stops. You open it up and it allows the air to flow through the reeds. Some of them are drone note stops. You open one up and it plays a continuous background note. The drone stops playing a continuous background note. That's useful in Indian classical music, but we just don't use that in kirtan. The air stops allows air through the harmonium, but in some harmoniums that I've played, I've just removed all the buttons, because why not just have the air going continuously? Why do you need an on-off switch? You don't have an on-off switch on your piano or your guitar. So the buttons are unnecessary. They're common. This one has 4 buttons. This slightly larger one has 6 buttons. But if you see a harmonium with 12 buttons, 15 buttons, that's not better. Don't get distracted by that. Also, other bling includes a scale changer. It's a little mechanism that allows you to shift the whole keyboard up or down a little bit to play your song higher or lower. As a music teacher, this kind of horrifies me, because to actually play a song higher or lower, you would move your hand a little higher on the keyboard. It takes a minute to learn how to do that. That is a musician's skill, to be able to move your song up or down a little bit, but it's very much worth learning. The scale changing mechanism is like training wheels, where it makes it easy to do it first, but if you use that, you'll never learn how to actually do it. So avoid that one. Another piece of bling is the coupler. It's this little metal lever that some harmoniums have on the side that allows you to couple harmonium notes. What that means is that right now I'm pressing down a single key. If the coupler was on, it would have this lever underneath also pressing down an additional key. So it would give every note that I play kind of more richness, more reeds, so it changes the tone a little bit, which is kind of a cool sound effect. However, if I'm playing a drone note and a melody, or a chord, I have 3 notes down right now. If I'm coupling, then now it adds another 3, so now I have 6 notes. Each one of those in a dual reed harmonium has 2 reeds. So now, with the coupler engaged, playing a chord means I have 12 reeds open receiving air. It's too much. So then you have the bellows starting to run out of air. As you're pumping, the sound is going, whoa, whoa, whoa. It gets this like wheezing effect. You're trying to keep up with it to keep the sound and the volume and the tone up. So the coupler is not really worth it. Most people, if they get an instrument with a coupler, they play around with it for a few days. It's kind of a cool sound, but then you don't use it. Anyway, so don't get blinded by bling. But consideration number 5 is something that is important, which is keyboard response time. So as I'm playing this harmonium, when I press down a key, if there's air pressure, if I've already kind of primed the instrument with some air pressure, And when I press down on the key, it's almost instantaneous that the sound comes out. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of harmoniums where you press the key and there's a little lag time. So it's like, it's minuscule, it's short, but it's enough to notice. And as a musician, it's disorienting. Because then what you're doing with your hand on the keyboard is a little bit time displaced from the sound that's coming out. So it's weird. It's a small enough gap that you can almost think there's nothing wrong with the harmonium, but it creates this subtle disorientation. So you want to make sure that there's as little lag time as possible. Pretty much when you press a key, the sound comes out. Okay, so number 6 is good sustain. You want your harmonium to have good sustain to be able to last a while on a single pump. So right now I have 3 notes down, which means there's a lot of air moving through the instrument. It's drinking down a lot of air to play all 3 of those notes from a chord. But my hand is able to pump really comfortably. That's because this harmonium happens to have good sustain. Some other harmoniums, even that look very similar, they might have the same number of pleats. Some people are superstitious about the number of pleats. They think, oh, you want more pleats? No, some harmoniums with even just 1 or 2 pleats in the bellows can still have good sustain. It's more about the build quality, whether there's little subtle leaks of air here and there, as well as just the size of the bellows. But mostly it's about build quality of craftsmanship. So you can get some harmoniums where the bellows capacity is actually quite low, or it has an air leak, and so it's losing air as you go. And then as you're pumping, it's going whoa, 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 the sound drops off. So to keep the sound nice and consistent, smooth and consistent, you have to be pumping a lot. So sometimes you'll see somebody playing kirtan and pumping like this, and giving themselves a heart attack or at least a repetitive strain injury. And they're doing their best to work with a harmonium that's losing air or using air inefficiently. So you want your harmonium to have good sustain. And that brings me to item number 7, which is to get your harmonium from a reputable store. And that's because, so I actually personally, some years ago, I imported my share of harmoniums from different places in India, and came to realize that when you get a shipment of products from India, often it's in various states of disrepair, or the quality control isn't necessarily what we're used to. They're handmade in India, and that gives them a certain charm, but there's all sorts of pitfalls. And so usually when an importer or a store is getting a large batch of harmoniums, there's a lot of work that they have to do on the instruments before it's really excellent quality, before it's really ready to be sold to a musician. So there's some websites online that you can find that aren't doing that, where they'll just get inventory from India and then sell it to you. No, you need someone to be sitting with the harmonium for hours, adjusting everything, making sure it's all in great condition before it gets passed along to you. So, and that includes the bellows, sustain, but a lot of other things, sticking keys, buzzing reeds, a lot of stuff that needs to get checked out and adjusted by the reputable store before you buy the harmonium. Okay, number 8 is the jolly. And this is kind of a funny little piece of the harmonium. Jolly in Hindi means window. Some of these are made out of glass, so you'll see it's like a glass window. This one is made out of wood, which is kind of cool because the wooden ones slide. In other words, this is fully muted. This is fully open. I usually like somewhere in between those, kind of muted and bright tones. So I might slide it open just a little bit, get a little of that brightness. If you were outside with a large crowd or something in a park, you want to really project your instrument. It can get very loud but very brash because it's those metal reeds coming out of the back. So a jolly's function is to kind of dampen those brash metal reeds. and kind of mellow out the tone of the instrument a bit. So the wood ones, the glass ones, they both work either as fine. Sometimes the glass ones can break in transport, in shipping. Sometimes the glass will shatter. But other than that, they both work, they both sound good. Yeah, so that's the jolly. Number 9 is that the harmonium needs to be in tune. So this is, again, kind of an amazing thing that any importer will discover when they get a batch of harmoniums. Some of them aren't in tune, and they actually still need the reeds to be filed further before the instrument is in tune. Or they might be checking out the harmonium, seeing if it's ready to go, and they find one sour note that sounds really funny or sounds a little flat. So they might just need to adjust a single reed, and they'll file that down in the front or the back of the reed to adjust the pitch of the reed. So it needs to be in tune with itself. Now, typically a harmonium is in tune with itself. That means that, for example, playing a note in an octave above blends in nice unison. Playing a chord with multiple notes, they blend together in the kind of harmony that we're used to hearing from in-tune instruments. So that's important. But then there's another issue of A440 tuning. A440 has become the kind of universal musical standard. It's originally from America. There were other tuning standards from Austria and from Britain of other standards like A444 and A435. But in India, some of their manufacturing equipment, reed making equipment, is from a prior era and from Great Britain even. So you have some reed makers producing reeds that might be sharper or flatter from what we're used to. And then the harmonium makers who buy those reeds, they may or may not try to adjust that to get it close to the A440 standard. So it's really hit or miss. When you get a harmonium straight from India, it might be close or it might not be close to A440. Again, the important thing is that it's in tune with itself so that it sounds sweet. But if you have an OCD ear and you really need things to be A440, or if you're going to be like recording an album with a piano and you can't retune a piano, if you're playing with a friend who plays guitar, they might just, they'll tune their knob down a little bit to match your harmonium because it's just a little different than the usual standard. No biggie. If you're playing with a piano, well, the piano, they're not going to retune to match the harmonium. So they're going to be a little bit out, and if that matters to you, then you want to ask and make sure that you're getting an A440 tuned harmonium. Okay, and number 10 is that you like the tone of the instrument. This really should have been number 1. That's the most important. You want your instrument to seduce you into playing, into practicing, into chanting. You want it to be such a beautiful instrument where you love the vibrations of it, you love the sound of it, and so, if it's out in your living room or whatever, you pass by it and it's just, it's delicious. It pulls you to sit down with it for a bit and do some chanting or some practicing. And, when you're first picking a harmonium, there's all sorts of factors, as we've been talking about. There's, the look of it, the build quality, the bellows size, different stuff. But really what's lasting and what's most significant is the tone. If you close your eyes and you're just playing a chord or you're even just playing some drone notes, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Really, it's the tone that I'm becoming friends with, the tone that's drawing me into the chant. So you want a harmonium where the tone appeals to you. I've played some harmoniums where the tone, it either sounds like a duck or a goat or a lawnmower or something, where there's just something off, where it's like, this isn't beautiful. Why is this not working? And I don't really want to sing with this instrument. So who knows? It's personal preference. But if you're getting to go to a store, then you want to try a bunch of different harmoniums, and maybe one will particularly speak to you. If you're buying online, then you want to just check out the quality of the store that you're buying from to make sure that they're, invested in giving you a high-quality instrument. And you could even, have an email exchange with them or whatnot and describe what you're wanting in your tone to make sure that you're getting what you're wanting and that you wind up falling in love with the tone of the instrument. The sound, the vibrations, that's the most important thing. All right, those are my 10 considerations. That was kind of a lot of information that I just steamrolled through, so hopefully that wasn't overwhelming. One other thing that some people ask me is what style harmonium do my favorite kirtan musicians play? Maybe what style harmonium does Krishna Das play, or Jai Uttal, or any other number of kirtan musicians? And by and large, the answer is that they're playing Delhi-style harmoniums of a variety of brands, but Delhi-style. Now there's also Calcutta-style, there's other types of harmoniums that have all sorts of differences. The bellows are designed differently, the reeds are designed differently, might even have different metal composition. The way that the keys hinge is different. A lot of things are different. But this style that you're seeing right here is a Delhi style. This slightly larger one, also Delhi style. Beena brand, DMS brand, Bava brand, and a bunch of smaller brands that come out of India that you may or may not see. They're all Delhi style. So at first glance, you're like, aren't those the same? Are they just copying each other? Well, it's not copying exactly. Is that they're all in Old Delhi. There's kind of a way that they've come up with manufacturing harmoniums that they kind of share. And they might even share subcontracting to a community of craftspeople. So there's a lot of overlap between the different brands. The brand that I am most fond of and that I've decided to carry here at Kirtan Central is Bava harmoniums, which is this style of Delhi harmonium. And in the next video, if you're curious about those, then I'm going to look specifically at Bava harmoniums and what kind of sets them apart from the other Delhi-style brands. Okay, that was plenty for one video. I hope this was useful to you. Happy chanting, and I'll see you down the trail. Lots of love.